A billionaire finds four lost children in a park during a snowstorm and offers them shelter in his mansion. When he returns home, something he sees leaves him in shock. The biting winter wind in New York battered Central Park as Robert Miller walked alone, his footsteps leaving deep prints in the snow that was quickly piling up. What had begun as a gentle flurry barely an hour earlier now threatened to turn the city into a white desert before nightfall. At 55, Robert was the epitome of success in the eyes of the business world. CEO of Miller Enterprises, one of the largest tech companies in the country, his fortune was estimated in the billions of dollars. His angular face, marked by deep expression lines and penetrating blue eyes, carried the seriousness of someone who had dedicated his entire life to work. His hair, once dark brown, now showed gray at the temples, giving him a distinguished look that matched his impeccable posture. Adjusting the cashmere scarf, a gift from Sarah that he had never had the heart to replace, Robert continued his daily walk, a ritual he had maintained religiously for 15 years, regardless of the weather. It started as a therapist's recommendation and became an anchor for his sanity. Out here, far from boardrooms and multi-million-dollar decisions, he could just be Robert. Not the CEO, not the billionaire, just a man with his thoughts and memories. The park was practically deserted, except for a few city workers rushing to spread salt along the main pathways. Robert watched them from a distance, admiring the dedication of those men who were fighting nature's inevitability. It was something he could relate to, that stubborn attempt to maintain control amid chaos. Then, an unexpected sound cut through the silence of the snowstorm. A child's sob, almost completely muffled by the wind, but distinctive enough to catch his attention. Robert stopped, his senses suddenly on alert. Years of important negotiations had taught him to trust his instincts, and something about that sound stirred an urgency in his chest that he hadn't felt in a long time. Leaving the main path, Robert followed the sound to an area near the playground. The snow was falling more intensely now, reducing visibility to only a few yards. As he rounded a large oak, he saw them, four small figures huddled against the trunk of the tree, trembling violently as they tried to shield themselves from the wind. Four children, none looking older than 6, clinging to each other in a tight circle of inadequate coats and frightened faces. "My God!" The exclamation escaped his lips before he could contain it, and the children startled at the sound of his voice. Immediately, Robert began to remove his wool coat, his fingers working quickly on the buttons while he assessed the situation. The oldest of the group, a girl with blonde hair that fell in disheveled curls around her face, lifted her eyes to look at him. There was something in her gaze, a mixture of fear and determination, that instantly reminded him of Sarah. Her lips had a worrisome bluish tint, but her stance was protective toward the younger children. "You're freezing," Robert said, keeping his voice gentle as he approached slowly. He removed his coat completely and held it out to the children. "Here, this should help a little." The girl hesitated for a moment, her green eyes studying Robert with a surprising intensity for someone so young. Finally, she gave a slight nod and accepted the coat, immediately wrapping it around one of the younger children, a little girl who, Robert noticed, looked practically identical to the boy next to her. "I'm Robert E.," he introduced himself, crouching in the snow to be at their eye level, ignoring the cold beginning to seep through his pants. "May I know your names?" "Emily," the oldest girl answered after a moment's hesitation. "I'm 6 years old." She paused before continuing. "This is Jack." She pointed to a boy with brown hair and equally dark eyes, who looked about 5. "And these are Olivia and Noah. They're twins." The twins, who couldn't have been older than 4, pressed even closer to each other when they heard their names. They had the same light hair as Emily, though a bit darker, and eyes of a deep blue that reminded Robert of a summer sky. "Nice to meet you," Robert replied, keeping his voice calm despite his growing concern about their situation. The children were clearly suffering from the cold, and the snowstorm was getting worse. "Where are your caregivers?" Emily exchanged a quick glance with Jack before replying. "Mrs. Stephen," she began, but a particularly strong gust of wind interrupted her, making the twins whimper from the cold. Robert realized this was no time for questions. The temperature was dropping quickly, and the children desperately needed shelter. "Listen," he said, looking each child in the eye in turn. "My house is very close, just a few blocks away. It's warm there, and we can make something hot for you to drink while we try to find who's supposed to be with you. What do you think?" The children looked at one another, years of warnings not to trust strangers evident in their hesitant expressions. It was Jack who broke the silence. "I can't feel my fingers anymore," he admitted in a low voice. Emily, showing a maturity that made Robert's heart tighten, studied him intently for a few seconds before making her decision. "Okay," she agreed, though her eyes remained vigilant. "But we all stay together." "Absolutely," Robert agreed readily. "No one gets separated." Carefully, he lifted Noah in his arms, noticing how cold the small boy felt even through the layers of clothing. Jack clung to his free hand with surprising strength, while Emily helped Olivia up. The oldest girl stayed close to the group, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings like a little sentinel. The route that Robert normally covered in less than 10 minutes turned into a challenging journey. The wind blew against them with renewed strength, and the snow was now falling so thickly that it was difficult to see more than a few feet ahead. Robert kept a careful pace, constantly checking whether all the children could keep up. When they finally turned onto East 75th Street, the sight of the Miller mansion emerging through the white curtain of the storm drew gasps of wonder from the children. The imposing 5-story building, with its late 19th century limestone facade and meticulously restored wrought iron details, looked as though it had stepped out of the pages of a fairy tale. Robert led them up the entry steps, which were carefully warmed by an embedded heating system. Still carrying Noah, he quickly entered the security code on a discreet panel by the door, and a soft click announced that the heavy door of carved oak was unlocked. The contrast between the freezing outdoors and the heated interior of the mansion was immediate. The entry hall, with its Italian marble floor and walls paneled in aged wood, was pleasantly warm. The immense baccarat crystal chandelier, the centerpiece of the space, cast a golden and welcoming light over the area. Robert watched with a mix of amusement and nostalgia as the children's eyes widened at the sight of the surroundings. It was the same look Sarah used to have whenever they entered a newly renovated room in the house, that look of pure enchantment he had loved so much to see on her face. That was when his gaze landed on something that made his heart stop. There, on the console next to the curved staircase, lit by the soft glow of a lamp, was the photograph. Sarah, his Sarah, radiant in a floral summer dress she had chosen especially for the occasion, her hands gently resting on her 8-month belly. The late afternoon sun created a golden halo around her hair, and her smile, that smile that still haunted his dreams. The photo had been taken exactly 3 days before the accident. 3 days before a runaway van ran a red light and stole away. In a matter of seconds, the entire future they had planned together. Sarah had been on her way to her final prenatal checkup when it happened. Robert was in an important meeting when he got the hospital's call. The memory of running through the sterile corridors, only to arrive too late, hit him like a physical blow. The doctor's grave expression, the words that changed his life forever. "I'm sorry, Mr. Miller. We did everything we could." Sarah and the baby, his son, were gone before he could say goodbye. "Mr. Robert," Emily's small but firm voice brought him back to the present. "Are you okay?" Robert blinked quickly, realizing he had been standing still holding Noah, his eyes fixed on the photograph. The children watched him with worried expressions, still shivering in their snow-soaked clothes. "Yes, Emily," he replied, his voice husky with suppressed emotion. He cleared his throat slightly before continuing. "I'm fine. Let's take care of you first. We need dry clothes and something hot to drink." As he led the small group toward the kitchen, Robert couldn't help but notice the irony of the situation. For 15 years, he had kept the house Sarah had decorated with so much love and so many dreams, practically like a mausoleum. The guest rooms, which she had insisted on furnishing for friends with children, had remained untouched. The baby's room, fully decorated and waiting only for the final touches, had been locked for so long that Robert no longer remembered where he had put the key. The kitchen, with its dark oak cabinets and marble countertops, was another testament to Sarah's dreams. She had planned it as the heart of the home, insisting on a large central island with stools high enough for children to sit and help with meal preparations. Robert helped Noah onto one of the stools, while Jack and Olivia settled side by side on two more. Emily, still watchful, remained standing until Robert gently indicated a fourth stool for her. Hot chocolate, he decided, turning on the professional stove. Sarah always said there's nothing better than hot chocolate on a snowy day. Who's Sarah? Noah asked innocently, his blue eyes fixed on Robert as he took a copper pot from the cabinet. The question caught Robert by surprise. It was the first time the boy had spoken since they'd been found in the park, and the first time in years someone had asked him about Sarah. For a moment, he said nothing, his hands busy with the ritual of preparing the hot chocolate, a recipe Sarah had insisted on teaching him during their last trip to Switzerland. Sarah was my wife, he finally answered, his voice soft as he measured out the special cocoa powder he still kept in the pantry. She loved snowy days like today. Was? Jack asked, leaning over the counter with curiosity. Emily nudged Jack slightly, as if reminding him not to ask personal questions of strangers, but Robert shook his head gently. It's okay, Emily, he assured her, slowly warming the milk. Sarah, she's been gone a long time, but she would have loved seeing this kitchen full of children. It was her dream. A comfortable silence fell over the kitchen, broken only by the soft sound of milk warming and the occasional crackle from the nearby fireplace in the adjoining living room. Robert worked methodically, following each step of Sarah's recipe, which she had written in her elegant handwriting. Heat the milk without boiling, slowly mix in the chocolate, add a touch of vanilla and a pinch of cinnamon. As he prepared the drinks, Robert discreetly observed the children. Their faces were starting to regain some color, and their shivering had lessened considerably thanks to the warm environment. Emily still maintained her protective stance, but her shoulders were visibly more relaxed. Jack had begun swinging his legs, a sign his natural energy was returning. The twins, Olivia and Noah, seemed fascinated by everything around them, their eyes scanning every detail of the luxurious kitchen. All done, Robert announced, pouring the hot chocolate into 4 porcelain mugs decorated with Christmas motifs, another item Sarah had chosen with future family holidays in mind. He placed 1 mug in front of each child, along with linen napkins. Careful, it's hot. He watched with a discreet smile as 4 pairs of small hands cupped the mugs reverently, as though holding precious treasures. Emily was the first to take a tentative sip, and her eyes went wide with surprise. It's delicious, she exclaimed, momentarily forgetting her usual caution. The others soon followed her example, and within minutes 4 chocolate-stained smiles lit up the kitchen. Robert felt something in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the drink he'd made for himself. It was a feeling he hadn't experienced in a very long time, something dangerously close to happiness. Outside, the snowstorm continued, its howling winds muted by the mansion's thick walls. Inside, however, in that kitchen that had remained silent for so long, there was life once again. The sound of children blowing on their hot drinks, their occasional murmurs of approval, even the chocolate stains beginning to appear on the marble countertop. All of it felt strangely right. Robert knew there was much to be done. They needed to find the children's caregivers, figure out how they got lost, and ensure their safety. But for now, watching those 4 small figures enjoying their hot chocolate, he allowed himself just to be present in the moment. Sarah always said that some of life's best things happened at the most unexpected times. Perhaps, Robert thought as he wiped a bit of chocolate from Noah's chin with a napkin, she was right. Maybe that snowstorm had brought more than just snow into his lonely life. From the console in the entrance hall, Sarah's photo seemed to observe the scene with her smile, forever frozen in time. And for the first time in 15 years, Robert felt he could look at it without his heart completely shattering. Because now, finally, his kitchen was exactly as she had always dreamed it would be, full of childish laughter and chocolate stains. Night had fallen over New York, and the snowstorm still danced relentlessly outside the windows of the Miller mansion. Robert remained awake in his second-floor library, an untouched glass of whiskey on the side table as he watched the flames in the fireplace. Upstairs, the 4 children slept in the guest rooms Sarah had decorated so many years ago. After the hot chocolate, Robert had improvised dinner with whatever he found in the always well-stocked but rarely used pantry. The children devoured the pasta with homemade tomato sauce as if they hadn't eaten in days, and maybe it was true. Emily had mentioned something about having had breakfast at the orphanage a long time ago, but she quickly changed the subject when Robert tried to ask more questions. Now, hours later, he couldn't stop thinking about how the children had behaved during bath time and bedtime. Emily, always the protector, insisted on helping the twins with the borrowed clothes, old items Robert had found in one of the rooms, likely left behind by visitors over the years. Jack, for his part, surprised everyone by revealing he could read, picking up a children's book from the shelf and reading a story to Olivia and Noah until they fell asleep. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway interrupted his thoughts. Robert got up, finding Emily standing in the doorway of the library, her blonde hair disheveled and her green eyes still drowsy. "I can't sleep," she admitted, hugging herself as if she were cold, despite the warmth from the fireplace. "Do you want to talk?" Robert offered, indicating one of the armchairs by the fire. Emily hesitated for a moment before entering the library, her bare feet silent on the Persian rug. She settled into the armchair, looking even smaller wrapped in the robe they had found in one of the closets. "This is a really beautiful library," she commented, her eyes scanning the floor-to-ceiling shelves. "At the orphanage, we only have one bookshelf. Most of the books are torn." Robert felt his heart tighten. "You like to read, Emily?" A small smile appeared on the girl's face. "Yes, Mrs. Stevens sometimes reads to us before bed, but she has to take care of a lot of children, so she can't read every day." "How many children are at the orphanage?" 23, Emily answered promptly. "We were 24, but Tommy was adopted last month." Her voice grew quieter as she continued. "He was 4 years old. It's easier when you're little." Robert understood the weight behind those words. At 6, Emily already knew her chances of being adopted decreased each passing year. The thought made his stomach churn. "How did you and the other children end up at the orphanage?" he asked gently. Emily fiddled with the edge of the robe for a moment before answering. "Jack arrived first. He was already there when I got there 2 years ago. His mum, she left him at the orphanage door with a letter. He doesn't like to talk about it." She paused, as if organizing her thoughts. "The twins arrived 6 months after me. They were so little and barely knew how to speak. The social worker said their dad died and their mum got sick. Couldn't take care of them." "What about you?" Robert asked gently when she fell silent. Emily shrugged, a gesture that made her look even younger. "I don't remember much. Just remember the fire. And a lot of people screaming. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. And then they took me to the orphanage." Robert felt his throat tighten. A residential building fire, 2 years ago. He remembered reading something about it in the papers, a tragedy that claimed several lives, apparently including Emily's parents. You know," Emily continued, her voice stronger now, "I take care of the little ones. Mrs. Stevens says I'm very responsible for my age. I help Olivia braid her hair. And when Noah has nightmares, I sing to him like—" She stopped abruptly. "Like your mom used to sing to you?" Robert finished gently. Emily nodded, tears glistening in her eyes but refusing to fall. "Sometimes I'm afraid I'll forget the song. It's the only thing I still remember about her." Before Robert realized what he was doing, he was kneeling beside Emily's armchair, his eyes level with hers. "You're a very brave girl, Emily, and an incredible big sister." "They're not really my siblings," she mumbled. "Family isn't always about blood," Robert replied, thinking of Sarah and the child he never met. "Sometimes it's about who we choose to love and protect." A noise at the door made them both turn. Jack stood there, holding Noah's hand, who appeared to have been crying. "He had a nightmare," Jack explained, his voice sleepy but concerned. Emily immediately stood, but Robert gently stopped her. "Let me try this time?" The girl looked surprised but nodded, watching as Robert approached the boys. Noah raised his arms instinctively, and Robert picked him up, feeling the small body trembling with muffled sobs. "Hey, buddy," he murmured, rocking gently. "It's okay now. You're safe here." "Where's Olivia?" Noah asked between sobs. "Here," a tiny voice replied from the doorway. And there was his twin sister, her big blue eyes wide with concern for her brother. Robert couldn't help but smile. "Looks like we're having a little nighttime gathering. How about everyone comes by the fireplace?" Within minutes, the 4 children were settled on the soft rug by the fire. Robert brought blankets and cushions from the sofa, creating a cozy nest where they all snuggled up. Noah was still sniffing occasionally, but he seemed calmer now that Olivia was holding his hand. "You know something?" Robert began, sitting down with them. "When I was little and had nightmares, my mom used to tell me stories about the constellations. Do you know any?" Jack shook his head, intrigued. "Like stars?" "Exactly. Each group of stars tells a different story." Robert pointed to one of the library's tall windows, where the night sky was visible between the clouds that were starting to clear. "Look, there's Orion, the hunter." As Robert shared tales of ancient heroes and Greek gods, he watched how the children reacted. Jack asked smart questions about each constellation, his eyes shining with curiosity. Olivia and Noah listened with full attention, craning their necks to see the sky through the window. And Emily. Emily watched it all with a slight smile, as if finally able to relax her protective role just a bit. Hours passed, and one by one the children fell asleep right there in their makeshift nest of blankets by the fire. Robert couldn't bring himself to move them. Instead, he remained seated in his armchair, keeping vigil over their slumber. Watching those 4 small sleeping figures, Robert felt something awaken in his chest, something he had buried along with Sarah and his dreams of fatherhood. It was a feeling terrifying in its intensity, this sudden desire to protect, to care for, to love. The storm outside was starting to calm, and with it would come the responsibility of returning the children to the orphanage. The thought made his heart ache. How could he send them back after hearing their stories, after seeing the strength and vulnerability in each of them? Emily, so young yet already carrying the weight of protecting others. Jack, hiding his pain behind curiosity and intelligence. The twins, who only needed love and security to flourish. Sarah always said everything happened for a reason. Could this be why he had kept the house exactly as she left it? So that one day he could shelter 4 little lost souls on a snowy night. The idea of adoption, which he hadn't truly considered since Sarah's death, began to take root in his mind. Was it possible? At 55, single, with a life devoted to business, could he be the father these children needed? Fear and insecurity fought against the growing desire in his heart. What if he failed? What if he couldn't give them everything they needed? What if... A slight movement caught his attention. Noah shifted in his sleep, his small hand instinctively seeking Olivia's. Even in slumber, the twins maintained their bond. Next to them, Jack was curled up like a kitten, and Emily, even in sleep, kept one arm protectively around the younger ones. Robert realized it was already too late for doubts. In less than 24 hours, these children had found their way not just into his house, but into his heart. The storm outside might be passing, but something far more powerful was just beginning within him, something not all his wealth could buy, but that 4 little orphans had freely given the chance to be a father. In the hall, Sarah's photo on the console seemed to smile approvingly, as if to say it was time to make that house a home once more. And for the first time in 15 years, Robert allowed himself to dream of a different future than the one he had planned, a future filled with children's laughter, stories about constellations, and yes, even nightmares that needed soothing in the middle of the night. Because sometimes, Robert thought as he watched the sunrise begin to color the New York sky, life's greatest blessings come disguised as snowstorms. The snow had stopped falling over New York, leaving the city covered in a pristine white blanket. At the Miller mansion, the first rays of sun found Robert already in his office, phone pressed to his ear as he spoke with Mrs. Stevens from the orphanage. "Yes, I understand your concern," he said, keeping his voice calm and professional. "But with the streets still blocked by snow and the children only just recovering from the shock, I believe it would be best if they stayed here for a few more days." He paused to listen. "Of course, you're welcome to come visit them as soon as possible." After a few more reassurances and promises to stay in daily contact, Robert hung up and leaned back in his leather chair. Through the slightly open office door, he could hear the children having breakfast in the kitchen, the clatter of cutlery, occasional laughter, Emily's voice gently scolding Noah for talking with his mouth full. The reality of the situation struck him hard. In just a few days, his silent mansion had become a home full of life. The children, initially shy and cautious, were beginning to show their true personalities. Opening his laptop, Robert began a discreet search on adoption procedures in New York. The initial information was intimidating: psychological evaluations, home visits, background checks, extensive social studies. For a multiple adoption, especially with siblings who were not all biologically related, the requirements would be even more rigorous. "Mr. Robert," Emily's voice startled him. She was standing in the office doorway, wearing one of the dresses the housekeeper had bought the day before, when Robert had urgently sent her to get appropriate clothes for the children. "Good morning, Emily. Have you had breakfast?" "Yes," she answered, approaching his desk hesitantly. "Aren't you going to eat with us?" There was a note of disappointment in her voice that made Robert feel a pang of guilt. He had hidden in his office as soon as he woke up, using the phone call to the orphanage as an excuse to avoid a family breakfast, something he hadn't experienced since Sarah was alive. He began, but was interrupted by a joyful shout from the kitchen, followed by more laughter. Emily smiled, a rare sound that lit up her entire face. "Jack is teaching the twins how to stack their toast. Mrs. Maria said it's okay to make a little mess." Mrs. Maria, the mansion's housekeeper for over 2 decades, had arrived the morning after the snowstorm and immediately taken charge of the situation. Robert had never seen her so animated, her eyes shining as she prepared special menus for the children and turned the laundry area into a drying station for their new clothes. "I think I can take a break," Robert decided, closing the laptop. His research on adoption could wait. In the kitchen, he found a scene that could have come straight out of Sarah's dreams. Jack, a cloth napkin tied around his neck like a cape, stood on a stool carefully arranging pieces of toast in a surprisingly stable structure. Olivia and Noah watched with admiration, their own attempts at construction in various states of collapse. "Good morning, kids," Robert greeted, met by an enthusiastic chorus of "Good morning, Mr." "Robert, look," Noah exclaimed, pointing to his crooked tower of toast. "I made a building like your house." "It's a castle," Olivia corrected, with the authority only a twin sister can muster. "Look at the towers." Robert approached to examine the constructions, making appropriately impressed comments about each one's architecture. Mrs. Maria, busy at the stove, threw him an approving glance over her shoulder. "Children need a good breakfast after all that adventure in the snow," she declared, setting a plate of eggs and bacon in front of him. "You do too, if I may say so." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of domestic activities Robert barely recognized as part of his normal routine. After breakfast, the children insisted on showing him the drawings they had made the previous night. Jack had drawn a complex map of the solar system, inspired by the constellation stories Robert had shared. Olivia created a family of colorful cats, while Noah opted for an abstract interpretation of what he claimed was dancing snow. Emily, meanwhile, had drawn the mansion with surprising accuracy for her age, including the window details and the wrought iron patterns. In the drawing, 5 smiling figures stood hand in hand in front of the house. "That's our—" She paused, correcting herself quickly. "That's your family, Mr. Robert. Look, here's Jack with his cape, and the twins, and me." Her voice trailed off as she pointed to the tallest figure. "And this is you." Robert felt his throat tighten when he realized Emily had drawn a smile on his face, something he barely remembered doing in the last 15 years. The afternoon brought more discoveries and adjustments. Robert found himself learning how to braid Olivia's hair under Emily's patient guidance, while Jack read aloud from one of the library's books, his clear, confident voice stumbling only over the toughest words. Noah, who had developed a fascination with the enormous TV in the living room, insisted on watching documentaries about planets, an interest clearly sparked by the constellation stories. Robert found himself sitting on the couch with the boy in his lap, patiently explaining why Pluto was no longer considered a planet. Lunchtime turned into an impromptu etiquette lesson when the children showed curiosity about the different types of silverware at the formal dining table. Robert, recalling the lessons Sarah used to give at fundraising dinners, found himself explaining the difference between salad forks and fish forks to a surprisingly attentive audience. Mrs. Stevens always says we need to learn good manners, Emily commented as she helped Olivia hold her knife properly. But at the orphanage, we only have one kind of fork. The casual remark made Robert pause in his own meal. While the children debated enthusiastically which utensil to use for pudding, he allowed himself to imagine what it would be like to have them in his life permanently. The idea, which should have been intimidating, felt increasingly natural. In the afternoon, while the children took their naps, a routine Mrs. Maria insisted on maintaining, Robert returned to his office and continued his research on adoption. This time, however, his searches were more focused, more determined. He found the website of a reputable attorney specializing in family law, Dorothy Chen, known for handling complex adoption cases. His fingers hovered over the keyboard for a moment before typing an email requesting an urgent, discreet consultation. The response came almost immediately. The attorney could meet him the next morning, before regular office hours. Robert confirmed the appointment, feeling a mixture of anxiety and determination. The sound of small footsteps in the hallway signaled the end of nap time. Soon, Noah appeared at the office door, his hair tousled from sleep and his favorite blanket trailing on the floor. "I had a dream," he announced, climbing onto Robert's lap without ceremony. "I dreamed we lived here forever." Robert felt his heart skip a beat. "Really?" he managed to reply, his voice rougher than he intended. Noah nodded solemnly. "You were our dad and made hot chocolate every day." Before Robert could fully process the impact of those words, more voices joined the conversation. Jack and Olivia appeared, followed by Emily, who looked as though she hadn't slept much, her eyes watchful as always. "Can we play in the garden?" Jack asked hopefully. "The snow looks perfect for making snowmen." Robert glanced out the office window at the garden covered in pristine snow. The rational side of his brain said he should get back to work. There were emails to answer, meetings to reschedule, a company to run. But then he felt Noah snuggle closer in his lap, saw the anticipation in Jack's eyes, the timid smile on Olivia's face, and the way Emily watched the scene with both hope and fear of disappointment. "Of course you can," he heard himself saying. "But first we need to bundle up properly." The next hour was spent outside in the garden, building not just one but 4 snowmen, one for each child. Robert oversaw the activity, helping position carrots for noses and buttons for eyes, surprising himself when he burst out laughing at the spontaneous snowball fight that erupted among them. During a brief pause, while helping Emily adjust the scarf on her snowman, she spoke quietly, just loud enough for him to hear, "You'd make a great dad." Her words hit Robert like a punch to the gut. Images of Sarah pregnant, the baby's never-used nursery. The shattered dreams of fatherhood flashed through his mind like painful snapshots. But then he felt Emily's small hand in his, saw the trust in her green eyes, and something inside him changed. Maybe he could be a good father. Not in the way he had originally planned with Sarah, but in a different, equally meaningful way. These children needed love, stability, and a home, all things he could provide, if only he found the courage to open his heart again. That night, after the children had all been tucked in, each one insisting on a goodnight kiss and a different bedtime story, Robert returned to his office. Sarah's photo smiled up at him from his desk as he opened his laptop again. "What would you think of all this, my love?" he murmured to the photograph. "4 kids at once. You'd probably say it's exactly the kind of crazy we need in this big empty house." With a determined sigh, Robert began gathering documents and information he would need for the meeting with the attorney the next morning. Certificates, financial records, medical history, anything to help build his case. Upstairs, he could hear Emily singing to the twins, the same lullaby her own mother had once sung to her. The sound filled the mansion with a sense of home that had been missing for 15 long years. Robert knew the road ahead would be challenging. There would be obstacles, investigations, questions about his ability to be a single father of 4 children. But for the first time since he'd lost Sarah and their unborn son, he felt ready to fight for a family. Because sometimes, he concluded as he closed his laptop and prepared for another night of vigil over his young guests, fate has a peculiar way of giving us exactly what we need. even if it arrives in a completely different package from what we expected. Morning was cold, but the sun shone over New York as Robert parked his car at the gates of Greenwood Cemetery. It was Saturday, and the children had stayed at the mansion with Mrs. Maria, who promised to keep them busy making cookies, an activity the kids were eagerly anticipating. Robert held a bouquet of white lilies, Sarah's favorite flowers, as he walked the familiar path between snow-covered headstones. 15 years of visits had made every step memorably painful. The Miller family mausoleum was an elegant white marble structure, with guardian angels at the corners and a prime view of the city. Robert stopped in front of Sarah's headstone, his fingers tracing the letters etched into the cold stone. Sarah Elizabeth Miller, beloved wife and mother, 1970-2010, love never fails. Just below, a small additional plaque marked the existence of their unborn son, James Miller, an angel we never knew, 2010. "Hey, love," Robert murmured, carefully placing the flowers in the snow. "I'm sorry I haven't come sooner. The last few weeks have been different from normal." The cemetery's silence was his only response, but Robert continued, his voice low with emotion. "You won't believe what happened. Remember how you always said our house was too big for just 2 people? Well, now it's full of life. 4 kids, Sarah. 4 little angels lost in a snowstorm." He paused, remembering the moment he found the children in the park. "The oldest, Emily, was 6. She reminds me of you, you know? Protective, huge heart. Then there's Jack, 5, so smart and curious about everything. And the twins, Olivia and Noah, they're 4 and just pure energy and joy." A gentle breeze stirred the petals of the lilies. "They're sleeping in the guest rooms you decorated, using those Christmas mugs you chose. The kitchen." Sarah, "The kitchen finally smells of cookies and hot chocolate like you always dreamed." Robert felt tears welling in his eyes. "But I'm scared." "Love. So scared. What if I'm not capable? What if I fail them like I failed you and James that day?" The guilt he had carried for 15 years weighed heavily on his chest. He should have been with Sarah at that medical appointment. If he hadn't been in an important meeting, maybe the tragedy could have been avoided. "They need to go back to the orphanage soon," he continued, his voice trembling. But the thought of watching them leave, Emily had to calm the twins last night because they started crying just thinking about going back. And Jack, he asked if he could take some books from the library with him. Robert knelt in the snow, not caring about the cold seeping through his pants. "What do I do, Sarah? How can I let them go when I already love them so much, when our house finally feels like a real home?" A ray of sunlight broke through the clouds at that moment, illuminating the headstone and making the engraved letters glow. Robert suddenly remembered a conversation he'd had with Sarah weeks before the accident. "If something happens to me," she'd said, gently touching her pregnant belly, "promise you won't let love die, that you'll keep your heart open." "Is that what you're trying to tell me?" he asked softly. "That it's time to keep my promise?" The distant sound of children's laughter from another part of the cemetery reached him, and Robert found himself smiling through his tears. "You would have loved them, Sarah. You would have been the best mother in the world to these kids." Standing up, Robert brushed the snow from his clothes. "I guess I always thought starting a family meant replacing you and James, but that's not it, is it? It's about expanding the love, not replacing it. About honoring your memory by creating the home we always dreamed of." With trembling fingers, he took Emily's drawing from his pocket, a picture of the mansion with 5 smiling figures out front. He placed it carefully beside the lilies. "What do you think of our family, love? Different from what we planned, but still perfect in its own way." At that moment, his phone vibrated in his pocket. It was a message from Mrs. Maria, a photo of the kids in the kitchen, their faces covered with flour as they decorated cookies. "I have to go," Robert said, touching the headstone one last time. "But I'll be back soon. With good news, I hope. I love you, Sarah. Always." On his way back to the car, his steps felt lighter, his mind clearer. The pain of loss would never entirely disappear, but maybe it was time to let new joy into his life. When he arrived home, he was greeted by 4 flower-dusted pairs of arms and chocolate-stained smiles. The smell of freshly baked cookies filled the air, exactly as Sarah had always dreamed. "Mr. Robert," Noah exclaimed, clinging to his leg. "We made star-shaped cookies just like your constellations." "And we didn't burn any," Jack added proudly. Olivia held out a specially decorated cookie. "This one's for you. Emily helped me write Dad on it with icing, but it's a little crooked." Robert's world stopped for a moment. He looked at Emily, who watched him nervously to see how he'd react. "Sorry," she whispered. "I told Olivia maybe it was too soon to—" Robert knelt down, meeting the children's eyes. "It's never too soon for love," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion. "And if you want, if everyone wants, I'd love to be your dad. Forever." The silence that followed was broken by Emily beginning to cry. For the first time since he had met her, they were tears of happiness. The twins, not fully understanding, joined the group hug anyway. Jack, always the observer, asked, "Are you sure? There are a lot of us." "I've never been more sure," Robert replied, feeling lighter than he had in 15 years. "Our family might not be conventional, but it's perfect just the way it is." Mrs. Maria watched from the kitchen doorway, discreetly dabbing her eyes with her apron. The afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, bathing the kitchen in a golden glow that seemed to bless the moment. And somewhere, Robert was certain, Sarah was smiling. Attorney Dorothy Chen's office occupied the entire 20th floor of a sleek building in downtown Manhattan. Robert arrived punctually at 7 in the morning, as agreed, straightening his tie while the secretary led him to the main conference room. On the way, he couldn't help but notice the various certificates and awards on the walls, all highlighting the firm's specialization in family law and complex adoption cases. Dorothy Chen was a middle-aged woman with a keen gaze behind red-framed glasses. She greeted Robert with a firm handshake and indicated one of the leather chairs around the conference table. "Mr. Miller," she began, consulting the notes in front of her, "your situation is unusual to say the least. 4 children at once, with no biological ties among them, apart from the twins, of course, and you as a single father." She paused, studying him over her glasses. "Why don't we start at the beginning?" Over the next hour, Robert recounted the events of the past few weeks in detail. The attorney listened carefully, occasionally jotting down notes and interrupting only to ask specific questions about the children and their interactions. "You understand this won't be a simple process?" she finally asked, setting her pen aside. "The adoption system has strict protocols, especially in cases of multiple adoption by a single parent." "I'm prepared to face any obstacle," Robert replied firmly. "These children, they're my family now. I'll do whatever it takes." Dorothy nodded, a small smile forming on her lips. "Good, because it will require a lot. First, we need to prepare your initial documentation, financial records, criminal background checks, complete medical history. Then there's the home study, which includes house visits, interviews with people close to you, psychological evaluations." "How long does all this take?" Robert interrupted, thinking of the kids waiting for him at home. "In normal cases, the process can take 6 months to a year. In your case," she checked her notes again, "given the complexity and the number of children involved, it could take longer. But we have one thing in our favor. The children are already in your temporary care, and from what you described, they're adapting well." The meeting continued for another 2 hours, during which Dorothy outlined each step of the process in meticulous detail. Robert left the office with a thick folder of documents to fill out and an even longer list of tasks to complete. Back at the mansion, he found the house in an uproar. The orphanage's social worker, Mrs. Jenkins, had arrived for her first official visit since the children had been staying with Robert. Emily was sitting rigidly on the living room sofa, answering the social worker's questions with studied caution. When she saw Robert, her eyes lit up briefly before returning to her composed expression. "Mr. Miller," Mrs. Jenkins greeted him with a professional nod. "I was just talking to Emily about the routine you've established here." Robert noticed how Emily clutched one of the decorative pillows tightly, her small fingers gripping the fabric each time the social worker made a note on her clipboard. "Emily has been a great help with the younger children," he remarked, sitting down near the girl. Almost imperceptibly, Her shoulders relaxed a little with his presence. "Yes, she mentioned that," Mrs. Jenkins replied in a neutral tone, "though I should express concern about placing so much responsibility on a 6-year-old. "Actually," Robert interjected gently, "we've been talking about that. Emily is learning she can just be a child here." "Right, Emily." The girl nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. "Mr. Robert says my only job is to play and be happy." The social worker made a few more notes before asking to see the other rooms in the house. During the tour, she meticulously examined every aspect of the mansion, from the safety bars on the windows to the contents of the refrigerator. Upstairs, they found Jack in one of the guest rooms, now clearly his room, with books spread out on the bed and a solar system poster freshly taped to the wall. "You like astronomy, Jack?" Mrs. Jenkins asked, noticing the planet drawings decorating the desk. "Mr. Robert taught me about the constellations," Jack replied enthusiastically. "And now we're reading a book about space exploration. Did you know there are people living in space right now?" Their conversation was interrupted by crying sounds coming from the adjacent room. It was Noah, waking from his nap earlier than usual, clearly distressed from a nightmare. Robert instinctively moved toward the room, but Mrs. Jenkins gently stopped him. "Let's see how the kids handled the situation," she whispered. Seconds later, Emily appeared in the hallway, followed by Olivia. The girls entered the room, and soon they could hear Emily softly singing the same lullaby her mother used to sing. Mrs. Jenkins watched the scene with professional interest, making more notes on her clipboard. Robert had to resist the urge to intervene, his heart aching at the sound of Noah's sobs gradually calming under Emily's gentle voice. Later, after the social worker's departure, Robert gathered the children in the library, his favorite room in the house, where so many memories had been created in recent weeks. "We need to talk about some important things," he began, watching how each child took their usual spot. Emily by the fireplace, Jack on the rug with a book still open on his lap, and the twins side by side on the sofa. "Is Mrs. Jenkins going to take us back?" Olivia asked in a low voice, gripping Noah's hand. "No, sweetheart," Robert quickly assured her. "Actually, that's what I want to talk about. I met with a lawyer this morning, a very special person who's going to help us stay together, forever." "Like a real family?" Jack asked, his eyes bright with hope. "Exactly like a real family," Robert confirmed. "But it's going to take some time. There will be more visits like today, more people asking questions and watching how we live together." Emily frowned thoughtfully. What if they decide we can't stay? The question hit Robert like a punch to the gut. It was his biggest fear, too, although he tried not to show it. "That's why we have to work together," he responded carefully. "Show them what we already know, that we belong to each other." "But you're rich," Noah commented with the simple logic of a 4-year-old. "Can't you just buy us?" Robert couldn't help a surprised laugh, but quickly grew serious again. "That's not how it works, buddy. It's not about money, it's about love, responsibility, and commitment. And mainly about what's best for you kids. What if," Emily began, hesitant, "what if they think it's best to split us up, send each of us to a different family?" The mere thought made Robert feel sick. "I won't let that happen," he promised firmly. "I'll fight for all of you together. The lawyer I hired is the best at cases like ours. But I need you to be honest with the people who come to visit. Tell them how you feel about what we do together." "About the constellation stories," Jack suggested. "And the cookies we make with Mrs. Maria," Olivia added. "And how you always check if we're tucked in at night," Noah chimed in. Robert felt tears sting his eyes. "Yes, about all that. About how we're building our family in our own special way." Emily got up from her chair and walked over to Robert, her green eyes serious. "I'll tell them you saved us, not just from the cold that day, but," she paused, searching for the right words, "but from loneliness too." In the days that followed, the mansion became a whirlwind of activity. Social workers came and went, asking questions and making observations. Robert underwent a battery of psychological evaluations, answering honestly about his past traumas and his healing process. Mrs. Maria was interviewed extensively about her observations of the family dynamic. She spoke proudly about how the children were flourishing and how Robert had transformed from a distant employer into a dedicated father. Each child had individual sessions with adoption specialists. Jack impressed the professionals with his encyclopedic knowledge of astronomy, all acquired in recent weeks with Robert. The twins, initially shy, opened up when discussing their drawings, almost all depicting their new family in various activities. Emily surprised everyone by requesting a personal meeting with Dorothy Chen. The lawyer, intrigued, agreed to visit the mansion on a Sunday. "I know I'm little," Emily began, sitting very straight in her armchair in the library, "but I understand things. I know some people think it's strange, a single man wanting to adopt 4 kids at once." Dorothy observed the girl with renewed interest. "What do you think about that, Emily?" "I think sometimes the best families are the ones we choose," she replied, quoting something Robert had said days earlier. "Mr. Robert, he didn't have to help us that day. He didn't have to open his house or his heart. But he did." And now she hesitated, tears shining in her eyes. "Now I finally know what it's like to have a real dad." The lawyer made extensive notes from that conversation, later telling Robert that she had rarely seen such emotional maturity in a child so young. Weeks turned into a month, then 2. Robert balanced his responsibilities at the company with the demands of the adoption process, often working late at night after the children were asleep. But never, not once, did he miss family dinner or the nightly story session. The mansion was gradually transformed. The room that would have been for Robert and Sarah's baby was redecorated, a deeply emotional process he faced with the children's help. Now it was a playroom, full of color and life, exactly as Sarah would have wanted. One evening, while helping Olivia brush her teeth, she asked a question that caught him off guard. "Can we call your wife Mom too?" Even though we never met her. Robert needed a moment to find his voice. "I think she would love that, sweetheart. Sarah always wanted to be a mom." "Emily said she's in heaven, watching over us along with our other parents," Olivia continued, her innocence making the moment even more precious. "I'm sure she is," Robert replied, kissing the top of her head. Later that night, after the children were all asleep, Robert sat in his office reviewing the mountain of paperwork required for the adoption process. Each form, each evaluation, each report was one step closer to making official what his heart already knew. These children were his family. Dorothy Chen had warned him the road would be tough. There would be questions about his ability to balance work and 4 children, about the trauma of losing Sarah and their unborn son, which might be seen as an obstacle, about the absence of a maternal figure. But Robert was ready to fight. Because every morning, when he woke to the sound of children's laughter echoing through the mansion's halls, every night when he sang lullabies or told stories about stars, every moment he saw love and trust in those 4 little souls destiny had dropped in his path, he knew he was exactly where he was meant to be. The adoption process would be just the beginning of his journey as a father. There would be challenges ahead, adjustments to make, difficult moments to endure. But with love, patience, and the determination he saw in Emily's eyes, Jack's endless curiosity, and the twins' pure joy, Robert knew they would succeed. Because sometimes the strongest families are forged not by blood, but by love and the conscious choice to belong to one another. News spread through the neighborhood like a whisper that gradually grew louder. It started with Mrs. Thompson, who had lived next door to the Miller mansion for 3 decades and couldn't help but notice the changes. The once silent garden now echoed with children's laughter. Lights stayed on later, and for the first time in 15 years, there were Easter decorations in the windows, clearly made by small, enthusiastic hands, on a particularly pleasant Saturday morning. While Robert was helping Jack ride a bike without training wheels in the front yard, Mrs. Thompson finally decided to satisfy her curiosity. "Robert Miller," she called from the sidewalk, her tone carrying years of silent concern for her solitary neighbor. "I see a lot has changed around here." Robert held the bike steady, while Jack regained his balance. "Mrs. Thompson, good morning." "Yes, things are different." "Dad," Jack called, still focused on his pedals. "Can I try on my own now?" The smile that lit Robert's face upon hearing the word "Dad" did not go unnoticed by the neighbor. Tears welled in her eyes as she watched him patiently explain how to keep his balance. jogging beside the bike for a few yards before letting go. Sarah would have loved to see this, Mrs. Thompson remarked softly when Robert returned to her. She always said this house needed children. Before Robert could respond, Emily appeared at the front door, followed by the twins. "Mr. Robert, Mrs. Maria wants to know if we can have a picnic in the yard today." Mrs. Thompson watched in amazement as Robert coordinated the children with a natural ease that seemed impossible for someone who had been isolated for so long. Within minutes, the yard turned into a movie scene. A checkered blanket spread on the grass, sandwiches handed out, and 4 clearly happy, well-cared-for kids. "They're orphans," Robert explained quietly to his neighbor. "I found them during that big snowstorm a few months ago, and now they say I'm trying to adopt them." The news spread rapidly after that. Mrs. Thompson, president of the Neighborhood Association for 20 years, made sure to share the story at their next meeting. Soon the entire neighborhood was in the know. Support started arriving in unexpected ways. The Chen family, who lived 3 houses down, showed up one afternoon with their own 5-year-old twins, inviting Olivia and Noah for a playdate. The children got along so well that they quickly established a weekly routine. Mr. Martinez, a retired teacher at the corner, offered to tutor Jack after learning of his interest in science. Twice a week, the mansion's library turned into an impromptu classroom, filled with lively discussions about physics and astronomy. Emily, initially more reserved about the changes, made an unlikely friend in Mrs. Thompson's teenage granddaughter, Sophie. The young woman, visiting her grandmother on weekends, was captivated by Emily's maturity and began teaching her piano on the mansion's long-unused instrument. One Sunday, Robert was surprised by a knock on the door. It was Reverend Parker from the local church Sarah used to attend. "I heard about what's happening," the man said with a gentle smile. "Sarah came to church every Sunday, you know, always lighting candles and praying for children who needed a home." Robert felt a lump in his throat. "I didn't know that." "Well, it seems her prayers have been answered, though not in a way anyone could have predicted." The Reverend paused. "The community wants to help, Robert. Let us be part of this story too." And so, gradually, the Miller Mansion, once a symbol of mourning and isolation, became a hub of community activity. Neighbors took turns offering rides when Robert had important meetings. Invitations to birthday parties and neighborhood events began pouring in. Dorothy Chen, the lawyer, couldn't believe the number of recommendation letters and statements she started receiving. Neighbors, local shopkeepers, even the mailman wanted to share their observations of how the children were thriving under Robert's care. "This is extraordinary," she remarked during one of her visits. "In all my years of practice, I've never seen such community mobilization for an adoption." Robert watched from his office window as the children played in the yard with their new friends. Emily was at the piano, her small hands following Sophie's instructions. Jack was chatting animatedly with his classmates who had come to study, while the twins ran around with the Chen children, their laughter echoing down the street. "You know what's most amazing?" he replied to the lawyer. "It's not just the children who are changing. It's as if the whole neighborhood is waking up from a long winter." Mrs. Maria, who was serving coffee, added her own observation. "Mrs. Sarah always used to say a house isn't truly a home until there's enough love to spill out through the gates." The following weeks brought even more changes. The neighbors organized a street fair, with proceeds going toward improvements at the orphanage where the children had lived. Emily and her new friends ran a lemonade stand. Jack surprised everyone with a small makeshift observatory, using the telescope Robert had given him and charging $1 for a glimpse of the stars. The twins, with Mrs. Maria's help, sold homemade cookies that quickly sold out. Watching it all, Robert felt something he hadn't experienced since his time with Sarah, a sense of belonging, of community. He was no longer just the lonely billionaire in the mansion at the corner. He was a father, a neighbor, part of something bigger than himself. One afternoon, while helping Emily practice piano, she made an observation that perfectly captured their transformation. "It's funny, isn't it? Before it was just the 4 of us at the orphanage and you alone in this huge house. Now it feels like we have the biggest family in the world." Robert kissed the top of her head, touched. "And you know what? I think that's exactly how it was meant to be." The next morning, When Dorothy Chen arrived for another meeting about the adoption process, she found a stack of new documents on her desk. Dozens of letters of support from the community, positive reports from the children's teachers, and glowing assessments from social workers about how well the family had integrated into the neighborhood. "Well," she said, adjusting her red-framed glasses, "I think we're ready for the final phase of the process." Robert felt his heart race. He knew the biggest challenges were still ahead, but for the first time, he didn't feel alone on this journey. He had not only 4 wonderful children by his side, but an entire community rooting for his success. Sarah's photo on the console seemed to smile more brightly that morning, as if she too knew that her final wish, to see the house filled with so much love it overflowed, had finally come true. A palpable tension filled the Miller mansion at dawn. It was the final week of evaluations, and a full team of social workers, psychologists, and adoption committee members was scheduled to conduct the last interviews. Dorothy Chen had warned Robert these would be the most crucial days of the entire process. "Remember," Robert said at breakfast, looking at the anxious faces around the table, "we just need to be ourselves. There are no right or wrong answers, only the truth about our family." Emily was pushing her cereal around in the bowl without eating, a habit Robert recognized as a sign of nervousness. "What if they ask hard questions? Then we'll answer honestly," Robert assured her, reaching across to hold her hand. "Just like we always do." Jackie Beeson, who had memorized the adoption process as if it were a scientific study, added, "Ms. Dorothy said we have an 82% chance of approval. Those are pretty good odds." The twins exchanged confused looks. "What are odds?" Noah asked, making everyone laugh and easing some of the tension. The first evaluator arrived promptly at 9. It was Dr. Patricia Santos, a psychologist specializing in non-traditional family bonds. She began by discreetly observing the family's interactions during their morning routine. Robert helped Olivia choose a hair ribbon, while Emily packed Noah's bag for his swim class. Jack was immersed in a new book on black holes, a gift from Mr. Martinez, but periodically glanced up to check that everyone was okay, a habit he'd developed over the past few months. "It's interesting," Dr. Santos remarked during her first break to take notes, "how family dynamics develop naturally, even under unconventional circumstances." Individual interviews began after lunch. Robert was first, spending a long session in the office where every aspect of his life was examined in detail. "Are you aware," the evaluator asked at one point, "that raising 4 children on your own, especially given your professional responsibilities, will be an extraordinary challenge?" Robert didn't hesitate. "Dr. Santos, I've spent 15 years building a business empire, believing it would fill the emptiness in my life. But it was only when I found these kids that I understood the true meaning of success. I have the resources, I have an incredible support network, and most importantly, I have enough love in my heart for each of them." The afternoon brought more professionals, a financial evaluator, who meticulously reviewed the funds Robert had set aside for the children's education and future, a home safety expert who inspected every corner of the mansion, and a social worker specializing in multiple adoptions. The children were interviewed one by one. Emily went first and surprised everyone with her eloquence in describing how life had changed since meeting Robert. "Before," she explained to Dr. Santos, "I always had to be the grown-up. I had to take care of everyone, be strong all the time. But here," she paused, a small smile on her face, "here I can just be a kid, because I know Mr. Robert is taking care of us." Jack, in his interview, impressed the evaluators with his unique perspective. "It's like a science experiment," he said, adjusting his new glasses Robert had recently gotten for him. "Take different elements, put them together under the right conditions, and something new and wonderful happens. It's how stars are born, you know." The twins, though younger, also had memorable moments in their interviews. Olivia proudly showed her sketchbook, full of pictures depicting special moments with their new family. "This is the day we made cookies," she explained, pointing to a colorful explosion on the page. "And this is Mr. Robert telling us stories about the stars. Noah, usually the quietest of the four, surprised everyone with a simple yet profound statement. "I don't have nightmares anymore," he told the psychologist, "because now I know that when I wake up, I'll really be at home." The most intense moment of the day came during the final evaluation, when the entire team gathered the family in the living room. After consulting her extensive notes, Dr. Santos asked the crucial question, "Children, do you understand that adoption is permanent? That if approved, Mr. Miller will be your father, legally and permanently?" Emily answered first, her voice clear and certain. "He's already our dad. The papers will just make official what we already know in our hearts." Jack nodded vigorously. "It's like when a planet finds its perfect orbit. No matter how many times it goes around, it always belongs in that solar system." The twins, in their characteristic simplicity, simply got up from their seats and ran to hug Robert, who could barely hold back his own emotions. "Well, Doctor," Santos said, a small smile appearing on her professional expression, "I think that answers our question about emotional bonds." Night fell over the Miller mansion, and gradually the evaluators left with their piles of notes and, Robert hoped, positive impressions. He tucked the children into bed as usual, but this time each goodnight hug felt charged with extra meaning. When he finally retreated to his office, he found Dorothy Chen waiting for him. She had discreetly observed the entire process throughout the day. "So?" Robert asked, barely containing his anxiety. Dorothy allowed herself a small smile. "The preliminary evaluations are extremely positive, Doctor. Santos already hinted her report will be favorable, and the other evaluations seem to follow suit." Robert released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "How long until—" "The committee meets next week," she replied, checking her schedule. "If all goes well, you'll soon be a legal family." Later, alone in his office, Robert found himself looking at Sarah's picture. "I hope you're proud, my love," he murmured. "It's not the family we planned, but it's perfect in its own special way." A small sound at the door made him turn. Emily stood there in new star-patterned pajamas. "Can't sleep?" Robert asked softly. She shook her head, entering the office. "I was thinking that when it becomes official, can we throw a party? Invite all the neighbors and our friends." Robert smiled, pulling her onto his lap. "Of course we can. The biggest party this neighborhood has ever seen. And can we invite Mrs. Stevens from the orphanage, so she can see we're happy?" "Absolutely. We'll invite everyone who's been part of this journey." Emily was silent for a moment, looking at Sarah's photo. "Do you think she'll be there too? Not physically, but—" "I'm sure she will, sweetheart," Robert replied, his voice thick with emotion. "She always wanted this house to be full of love and joy. And thanks to you kids, it finally is." Father and daughter stayed there for a while, sharing a moment of peace before the big changes that lay ahead. Neither could imagine that, in just a few days, their newly formed family would face its greatest challenge yet. The morning began like any other at the Miller mansion. Robert was in the kitchen, helping Noah with his cereal while Emily braided Olivia's hair. Jack Weghurst, as usual, was absorbed in one of his books, occasionally sharing facts about black holes with anyone who would listen. Robert's phone rang at 7:15, right on schedule, his executive assistant with the daily briefing. But this time, something in her voice was different. "Mr. Miller," Sarah Martinez said, her voice tense, "you need to see today's Wall Street Journal." Front page. Robert picked up his tablet, and in seconds his world fell apart. The headline jumped from the screen like a punch to the gut. "Accounting irregularities at Miller Enterprises. CEO under investigation." Emily, ever alert to Robert's mood changes, noticed his expression immediately. "Is everything okay, Mr. Robert?" "Yes, sweetheart," he answered automatically, but his mind was already processing the implications. The article detailed alleged accounting manipulations in the company's international division, suggesting an elaborate scheme of tax evasion and money laundering. "Mr. Miller," his assistant continued on the phone, "the press is already crowding outside the office. And there are some reporters headed to your house." Robert glanced at the children, his heart constricting. "Sarah, cancel all my meetings. Call my lawyers for a video conference in an hour." And please arrange extra security for the house." He had barely hung up when Dorothy Chen called. "Robert, have you seen the news?" "I'm looking at it now," he replied, his eyes still scanning the devastating article. "Dorothy, the adoption process." "The committee has already been in touch," she interrupted, her voice grave. "They're putting everything on hold until this is resolved." Robert closed his eyes, feeling as though the ground was vanishing beneath his feet. The sound of children's laughter at the breakfast table now felt like it was coming from another world. "Dad," Jack's voice snapped him back to reality. "There are people with cameras outside." Robert stood up quickly, heading to the window. Several news vans were already parking in the street, and photographers were setting up at the edge of the property. "Mrs. Maria," he called to the housekeeper, who was already watching the scene with concern. "Please keep the curtains closed and the children away from the windows. I'll call the school and let them know they won't be coming today." "But it's lab day," Jack protested, his eyes wide behind his glasses. "Mr. Martinez was going to show us how a microscope works." "I know, buddy." Robert knelt beside him. "But we need to stay home today. I promise I'll explain everything, okay?" The next few minutes were a whirlwind. Robert coordinated with his security team to ensure no reporter got close to the house, while simultaneously trying to keep the children calm and occupied. It was Emily who finally confronted the situation. After setting the twins up with coloring books in the library, she found Robert in his office, in the middle of a frantic series of phone calls. "It's about the company, isn't it?" she asked, her voice small but steady. "I saw the paper when you left your tablet on the table. They're saying bad things about you." Robert quickly ended his call and turned his full attention to her. "Yes, Emily. Some people are making very serious accusations about how I run my company." "Are they true?" "No," he replied without hesitation. "But I'll need time to prove it." Emily bit her lip, a gesture Robert recognized as her deepest worry. "Is this going to mess up the adoption?" Robert felt his heart break. How could he explain the complexity of this situation to a 6-year-old? How to say that all their carefully built plans might now be threatened by false accusations? "Emily," he began carefully, "I promise I'll fight with everything I have to keep our family together. But I need you to be strong right now, especially for the little ones." She nodded solemnly, but before she could respond, they were interrupted by shouts from downstairs. Noah had turned on the TV in the living room, and Robert's face was now on every news channel. Serious accusations against Miller Enterprises CEO Robert Miller, who recently gained local media attention for his attempt to adopt 4 orphaned children. Robert ran to switch off the TV, but the damage was done. Noah was crying. Olivia clung to him, and Jack stood in the doorway, his face pale. "Are they going to take us away?" Olivia's voice trembled with the question everyone feared. "No," Robert answered with more firmness than he felt. "I won't let that happen." The following hours were a juggling act in the impossible. While trying to manage the crisis at the company through video conferences in his office, Robert also had to handle the children's palpable fear and the mounting pressure from the media. Dorothy Chen arrived mid-afternoon, forcing her way through the crowd of reporters with the help of security. She brought even more troubling news. "Child Services is sending an emergency evaluation team," she informed him. "They want to determine if the children are in a stable and safe environment." "This is ridiculous," Robert exploded, losing his composure for the first time. "These accusations have nothing to do with my ability to be a father." "I know," Dorothy said softly, "but we have to play by their rules if we want to keep the children." Outside the office, they could hear Mrs. Maria trying to distract the kids with the promise of baking cookies, but even that normally joyful activity sounded forced today. That night, when Robert finally got a break from the endless calls and meetings, he found the children gathered in the library, their safe space since the beginning. Emily was reading a story to the twins, while Jack rearranged his collection of spacebooks, a habit he resorted to when anxious. "Can we talk?" Robert asked gently, sitting on the sofa. 4 pairs of eyes looked at him, each reflecting different degrees of worry and fear. "I know today was scary," he began, "and you must have a lot of questions. I want you to know you can ask me anything." "Why are people saying bad things about you?" Jack asked first. Robert took a deep breath. Some people think I did something wrong at my company, something about money and taxes, but I didn't, and I'm working on proving that. Why are there so many people with cameras outside? Olivia questioned. They're reporters. They want to write stories about what's happening. Bad stories, Noah asked in a small voice. Some of them, yes, Robert admitted. But what matters is that we know the truth. Emily, who had remained silent, asked the hardest question. What if they don't believe you? What if they make us leave? Robert felt tears well in his eyes, but he held them back. Listen, all of you, he said, opening his arms so the children could gather in a group hug. No matter what happens, no matter what they say, you are my family. I will fight for you with everything I have. That night, none of the children wanted to sleep in their own rooms. Robert ended up setting up a camp in the library, with mattresses and blankets spread out on the floor. As he told yet another story about constellations, he tried not to think about the headlines that would fill tomorrow's newspapers. The days that followed brought new challenges. The community, which had been so supportive, began to split. Some neighbors stood firmly by Robert, defending his character and dedication to the children. Others, influenced by the negative media coverage, started questioning whether he was truly fit to be a father. The Chen children's playdates with the twins were suddenly cancelled. Although Mr. Martinez still believed in Robert, he was advised to temporarily suspend Jack's science lessons. Even Sophie, Emily's piano teacher, was told by her parents to keep her distance. The forced isolation was especially hard on the children. Used to a life now filled with friends and activities, they found themselves confined once again, this time not by a snowstorm, but by a far more powerful tempest. Robert split his time between meetings with lawyers, trying to uncover the source of the accusations, and moments with the children, trying to maintain some sense of normalcy. Sometimes he felt he was failing at both. One night, after another exhausting day of investigations and interviews, he found Emily awake in her room, looking out the window at the news vans still parked on the street. "I can't sleep," she admitted when he sat beside her. "Me neither," Robert confessed. "At the orphanage," Emily began hesitantly, "I learned that sometimes bad things happen to good people. But I also learned that the truth always comes out sooner or later." Robert's heart tightened at the precocious wisdom of this little girl who had become his daughter in all the ways that mattered. "You know what else I learned," she continued, "that a real family stays together no matter what." In that moment, Robert made a silent promise to himself and to the children. No matter the personal or professional cost, he would find a way to prove his innocence and keep his family together. Because Emily was right, a real family stays together, especially in the hardest times. What he didn't know was that, somewhere in the Miller Enterprises archives, crucial evidence of his innocence was about to surface, completely changing the course of their story. But for now, all he could do was hold his daughter close and hope the love they had built was strong enough to weather the storm. The truth arrived on a Thursday morning, via an anonymous email sent simultaneously to the Miller Enterprises Board of Directors and the major news outlets. The sender was Marcus Chen, former CFO of the company's international division, who had mysteriously vanished weeks before the scandal broke. In the email, Marcus confessed his sole responsibility for the fraud scheme, attaching documents that unequivocally proved Robert Miller not only had no knowledge of the irregularities, but had in fact initiated an internal audit that was on the verge of uncovering the scheme. "That's why I had to act," Marcus wrote in his confession. "I knew the audit ordered by Miller would find everything, so I planted fake evidence to incriminate him, hoping the confusion would give me time to flee. But I can't live with this guilt anymore, especially knowing my greed is threatening not just an innocent man's reputation, but also the future of 4 orphaned children." Robert was in the library with the children when he got the news. Emily was practicing piano. Despite no regular lessons with Sophie, she kept diligently working on her own. Jack was explaining solar eclipses to the twins, using an orange and a marble as improvised models. "Dad?" Jack was the first to notice the change in Robert's expression as he read the email on his phone. "Is something wrong?" Robert needed a moment to find his voice. "Yes, son, something really good just happened." The next few hours were a whirlwind. The same news channels that had condemned Robert now scrambled to report his innocence. The reporters who had camped outside the mansion for weeks wanted exclusive interviews about his triumphant vindication. But Robert had only one priority: his family. Gathering the children in the library, the refuge that had sheltered them through the crisis, he explained the situation as simply as possible. "Remember how I said the truth always comes out?" he asked, smiling at Emily. "Well, it did. The bad people who did wrong at the company were found out, and now everyone knows I had nothing to do with it." "So you're not going to jail?" Noah asked with a 4-year-old's innocence. "No, buddy, I'm not going to jail." "And they won't send us away?" Olivia added, her small hand seeking her twin brother's. Robert felt tears pricking his eyes. "No, sweetheart. Nobody's going to separate our family." Dorothy Chen arrived at the mansion later that afternoon, carrying a folder everyone recognized immediately: the adoption papers. "The committee held an emergency session as soon as the news broke," she explained, genuine relief lighting her normally serious face. "They were especially impressed by how you handled the entire situation, Robert." "What do you mean?" "Well, for starters, you prioritized the children's well-being above all else. You maintained their routines as much as possible, protected them from the media, and most importantly, you were honest with them in an age-appropriate way. The social worker's report specifically highlights how safe and loved the children felt, even during the crisis." Emily, seated close enough to hear, added her own comment. "He told us stories every night, even when he was really tired, and he always said we'd stay together no matter what." Dorothy smiled at the girl. "Exactly. And that's why I'm pleased to inform you that the committee unanimously approved the adoption. We just need your signature, Robert, and it's official." The moment Robert signed the papers was forever etched into everyone's memory. His hands shook slightly as he wrote his name, officially becoming the father of Emily, Jack, Olivia, and Noah Miller. "Are we a real family now?" Olivia asked, her wide blue eyes brimming with emotion. "We've always been a real family, sweetheart," Robert replied, pulling her onto his lap. "Now we just have a piece of paper that says what we already knew in our hearts." Word of the adoption approval spread quickly through the neighborhood. Mrs. Thompson was the first to arrive, bringing a homemade cake and tears of joy. Mr. Martinez came soon after, carrying a new telescope for Jack. "So we can watch the next eclipse as a family," he explained. The Chen family brought their twins for a long overdue visit, and soon the mansion's garden was full of children playing, as though the recent weeks of isolation had never happened. Sophie returned to resume Emily's piano lessons, and Emily greeted her with a tight hug before showing how much she had practiced on her own. The official celebration took place the following weekend, a party that gathered the entire community. The mansion's garden was decorated with lights and flowers, tables set out on the lawn, and Mrs. Maria oversaw an army of helpers in the kitchen to ensure there was enough food for everyone. Robert watched the scene with his heart overflowing with joy. Emily played piano inside the house. The doors opened so the music drifted into the garden. Jack animatedly discussed constellations with a group of fascinated children using his new telescope. The twins ran among the guests, their laughter mixing with the music and conversation. Mrs. Stevens from the orphanage came especially for the celebration. "You know," she told Robert in a quiet moment, "in all my years of work, I've never seen a family form so perfectly. It's as if you were meant to find each other in that snowstorm." 5 years later, the Miller mansion was bustling with preparations for a special celebration, the 5th anniversary of the adoption. Emily, now 11, was practicing a special piano piece she had chosen just for the occasion. Her longer, more skilled fingers danced over the keys with confidence. Jack, 10, had prepared a presentation about the family's history using his new computer. "It's like a scientific documentary," he explained, pushing his glasses up in his characteristic gesture. "It starts with the statistical probability of a snowstorm of that magnitude hitting on exactly that day." The twins, now 9, had grown but retained their special bond. Olivia had developed a talent for art, filling the house with her colorful paintings. Noah had discovered a passion for music like his older sister, though he preferred the violin to the piano. Robert, watching his children get ready for the party, could hardly believe how quickly time had flown. His hair was a bit grayer, the lines around his eyes a bit deeper, but his smile was more frequent and genuine than it ever was before that snowy night. Miller Enterprises had fully recovered from the scandal, emerging stronger and with transparency policies that became a model for the industry. But Robert had learned to delegate more, ensuring he never missed important moments in his children's lives. That evening, after the guests had left and the children were finally asleep, Robert found himself, as he had so many times, in the library. Sarah's photo still occupied a place of honor, but now it was surrounded by countless other pictures, moments captured over the last 5 years that told the story of his unconventional family. "You were right, love," he murmured to the photo of Sarah. "Sometimes the best things in life come disguised as storms." And outside, as if in response, tiny snowflakes began to fall gently over New York, reminding everyone that sometimes the happiest endings begin on the coldest nights.